So, last night was a complete and utter nightmare. I woke up around 2 a.m. feeling parched and hoping to find my wife, Claire, beside me. But nope, her side of the bed was empty. At first I thought maybe she was in the bathroom or something, but when I didn't hear any sounds from there, I got a bit worried. Deciding to grab a glass of water and check on her, I headed to the kitchen. As I walked through the dark hallway, I heard some faint rustling noises coming from the living room. My heart started pounding as I tiptoed closer, and that S when I saw them. There she was, my wife, in the arms of Luke, our daughter Hannah S. husband. They were kissing passionately on the couch, completely oblivious to my presence. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My mind was racing, trying to process the betrayal happening right before my eyes. I snapped. "Bastard!" I screamed, charging into the room. The look on their faces was priceless, pure shock and fear. I grabbed Luke by the collar and threw him to the floor. Rage consumed me as I started throwing crushing blows at him, not even caring about the consequences. Claire was screaming, trying to pull me off him, but I was too far gone. Just as I was about to drag him out of the house, our daughter Hannah came downstairs, drawn by the noise. "What the hell is going on in here?" she shouted, her eyes wide with horror. She looked between her mother, her husband, and me, trying to make sense of the chaotic scene. The living room was a mess, with furniture knocked over and both Claire and Luke looking disheveled. My fists were clenched, my knuckles bloody from hitting Luke. Hannah S.'s face was pale, her eyes filling with tears as the reality of the situation sank in. "Mom? Luke? How could you?" Hannah S.'s voice cracked, and she turned to me, her expression a mix of confusion and hurt. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my raging emotions. "Hannah, I am sorry you had to see this. But your mother and Luke, they've betrayed us both." Claire was sobbing, trying to reach out to Hannah. "Sweetheart, it's not what you think." "Don T," I interrupted, my voice cold and hard. "Don, do you dare try to justify this?" The room was silent except for Claire's sobs and Luke's heavy breathing. Hannah stood there shaking her head, unable to process the betrayal from two of the most important people in her life. The night had turned into a twisted nightmare none of us would ever forget. The night after discovering Claire and Luke together was a blur of emotions. I couldn't sleep, my mind replaying the horrific scene over and over again. How could they? How long had this been going on? My anger simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Claire and I avoided each other, both of us lost in our own thoughts. I had no idea what to say to Hannah, who had locked herself in her room, probably trying to come to terms with the betrayal by her own husband and mother. I decided to head to work, hoping a change of environment would help clear my head. But as soon as I walked into the office, my phone buzzed with a message from Hannah. "Hannah, Dad, we need to talk. Can you come home early?" I knew this conversation was inevitable, so I replied quickly. "Me? Of course. I'll be home by lunch." The rest of the morning was a haze. I could barely focus on my tasks, my mind consumed by the mess waiting for me at home. When noon rolled around, I left the office and drove back, dreading the confrontation. Hannah was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Claire was nowhere to be seen, which was probably for the best. "Dad, I don't understand," Hannah said, her voice trembling. "How could Mom do this? And with Luke?" I sighed, sitting down beside her. "I wish I had answers, Hannah. I was just as shocked as you were." Tears streamed down her face as she looked at me, searching for some kind of reassurance. "What are we going to do?" I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "First, we need to figure out what you want, Hannah. This affects you just as much as it does me. Do you still want to be with Luke after what he's done?" She shook her head vehemently. "No, I don't think I can ever forgive him. Then we need to make sure he leaves," I said firmly. "And as for your mother, I don't know, Hannah. This changes everything." Just then, Claire walked into the room, her eyes filled with remorse. "Hannah, I am so sorry. I never meant to hurt you." Hannah's expression hardened. "It's just a little late for apologies, Mom. You and Luke, you broke my heart." Claire's tears flowed freely as she reached out to her daughter. "Please, Hannah, I know I've made a terrible mistake, but I'm still your mother. Can we please try to talk about this? Hannah stood up, stepping away from Claire. I don't think I can talk to you right now. I need time to process all of this. Claire's sobs grew louder as she looked at me, pleading for some kind of support. But I couldn't bring myself to comfort her, not after what she'd done. Hannah, I said gently, why don't you take some time for yourself? Go stay with a friend or somewhere you feel safe. We'll figure this out, I promise. She nodded, grabbing her bag and heading for the door. I'll call you later, Dad. As she left, Claire collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. What have I done? I stood there, feeling a mix of anger and pity. You destroyed our family, Claire. That's what you've done. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with despair. Can we fix this? Can we ever move past this? I didn't have an answer. The future seemed uncertain, filled with the shadows of betrayal and the broken pieces of our once happy family. As I walked out of the room, I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same again. The next few days were tense and awkward. Hannah stayed with her best friend, leaving Claire and me to navigate the minefield of our shattered marriage. We avoided each other as much as possible, only exchanging a few necessary words. The silence was deafening. On the third day, I decided it was time to have a proper conversation with Claire. We needed to understand how we got here and what, if anything, could be salvaged. I found her in the kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of cold coffee. Claire, we need to talk, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and guilt. I know. I have been dreading this. We sat at the kitchen table, the silence stretching between us. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. How long has this been going on? Claire sighed, tears welling up in her eyes. It started a few months ago. Luke and I, we just connected. It was never supposed to go this far. A few months? I repeated, feeling the weight of her words. So every time you smiled at me, every time we talked about our future, you were lying? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this to happen. But Luke, he was there, and I was weak. I clenched my fists, trying to contain my anger. You were weak? That's your excuse? You had an affair with our son-in-law, Claire. You betrayed your husband and your daughter. This isn't just about weakness, she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. I know I've ruined everything, but please, can we try to fix this? Can we go to counseling or something? I shook my head, my mind reeling. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, Claire. Trust is the foundation of any relationship, and you've shattered it. She looked up, desperation in her eyes. I'll do anything to make this right. Please don't give up on us. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I got up, grateful for the distraction. When I opened the door, I found Luke standing there, looking just as broken as Claire. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice trembling. I stepped aside, letting him in. This better be good. Luke walked into the living room, glancing nervously at Claire. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I never meant for this to happen. I crossed my arms, glaring at him. Save it, Luke. You've done enough damage. What do you want? He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. I want to make things right. I know I've hurt Hannah, and I'll do whatever it takes to fix it. I'm going to move out, give her space, and hope she can forgive me someday. And what about Claire? I asked, my voice cold. Luke glanced at Claire, then back at me. I don't know. We were both stupid and selfish, but I want to focus on Hannah right now. She's my wife, and I love her. Claire's face crumpled, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. What about us, Luke? What about what we had? He shook his head, pain etched on his face. It was a mistake, Claire. A terrible, unforgivable mistake. We have to face the consequences of our actions. I felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness at his words. At least he had the decency to acknowledge the mess he'd made. But the damage was done, and there were no easy fixes. Hannah's staying with a friend, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Give her time. Maybe one day she'll find it in her heart to forgive you. Luke nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. "Thank you. I'll wait as long as it takes." As he turned to leave, Claire reached out, her voice desperate. "Luke, please." He looked at her, his expression torn. "I am sorry, Claire, but I have to go." The door closed behind him, leaving us in the heavy silence of our broken home. Claire collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her, feeling a mixture of anger, pity, and sorrow. We were a family torn apart by betrayal, and the path to healing seemed impossibly long. But somehow, we had to find a way to move forward, to pick up the pieces, and rebuild our lives. In the days that followed, the house remained a tension-filled space. Hannah had decided to stay at her friend S' place indefinitely, needing distance from the chaos. Claire and I were left to navigate the ruins of our marriage, each step forward feeling like walking on shattered glass. One evening, after another silent dinner, I decided I couldn't take the suffocating atmosphere any longer. "Claire, we need to make some decisions. We can keep living like this." She looked up from her plate, her eyes hollow. "What do you want to do, John?" I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Counseling, maybe. Separation, if that doesn't work. We need to figure out what S next." Claire nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you, John." I wished I could believe her, but the wound was still too fresh. Let us take it one step at a time. That night I slept on the couch, the silence of the house pressing down on me like a weight. I couldn't help but think about Hannah and how she was coping. She had sent a few texts saying she was okay, but I knew she was hurting deeply. The next morning I received a call from Hannah. "Dad, can we meet? I need to talk to you." "Of course, sweetheart. Where do you want to meet?" She suggested a cafe downtown, a neutral place where we could talk without the shadows of our home looming over us. I agreed and headed out, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope. When I arrived, Hannah was already there, sitting at a corner table. She looked pale and tired, but she managed a small smile when she saw me. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetie." I hugged her, feeling the weight of the past few days lift slightly. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't know, it's all so surreal. I never thought Mom and Luke could do something like this." I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I know. It's a lot to process, but we'll get through this together, okay?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I talked to Luke. He wants to make things right, but I don't know if I can ever trust him again." "Trust is something that takes time to rebuild," I said, echoing my own feelings about Claire. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. Just take the time you need." Hannah took a deep breath. "Thanks, Dad. I feel so lost." "We're all a bit lost right now," I admitted, "but we'll find our way, one step at a time." As we talked, I felt a renewed sense of determination to rebuild my relationship with Hannah, even if my marriage to Claire was beyond saving. We finished our coffee, and I walked her back to her friend S' place, promising to check in regularly. Back home, Claire was waiting for me, her expression anxious. How did it go? I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy. It was tough, but we talked. "Hannah is hurting, but she is strong. She'll get through this." Claire nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I am so sorry, John. I wish I could undo everything." I sighed, feeling a pang of sorrow for the woman I once loved. "We can change the past, Claire. All we can do is try to move forward." That evening, as I was sorting through some old papers, I found a letter that Luke had written to Hannah before their wedding. It was filled with promises of love and devotion, words that now felt hollow and empty. I felt a surge of anger and sadness, realizing how deeply the betrayal had cut. In the days that followed, Claire and I began attending counseling sessions. It was awkward and painful, but necessary. Each session forced us to confront our feelings, our mistakes, and the possibility of a future without each other. One day, after a particularly intense session, I ran into Luke at the grocery store. He looked as miserable as I felt, his eyes bloodshot and his shoulders slumped. "John," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Luke," I replied curtly, not wanting to engage but knowing we had to talk at some point. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he began, his eyes pleading, But I want to make things right with Hannah. I'll do anything. I stared at him, feeling a mix of anger and pity. You've got a long road ahead of you, Luke. Don't expect things to go back to normal just because you are sorry. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. I know. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Good, I said, my voice hard, because if you ever hurt her again, I want to hold back next time. Luke swallowed hard, nodding. I understand. I turned and walked away, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Back home, Claire was waiting for me. How was your day? She asked, trying to keep things normal. I shrugged, sitting down at the kitchen table. I ran into Luke. Her eyes widened. And he is a mess, I said bluntly. But he says he wants to make things right with Hannah. Claire nodded, her expression sad. I hope they can work it out. Me too, I said, not entirely sure if I meant it. But it's going to take time. As the weeks went by, we continued our counseling sessions, each one bringing us a little closer to understanding and perhaps forgiveness. It wasn't easy, and there were days when I thought about giving up. But for the sake of our family, we kept pushing forward. Weeks turned into months, and the tension in our home slowly began to ease, though the scars of betrayal were still fresh. Claire and I continued our counseling sessions, trying to piece together what was left of our marriage. Hannah, meanwhile, had started talking to Luke again, though their interactions were tentative and filled with lingering pain. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to find Luke's parents, Carol and Richard, standing on the doorstep. They looked as worried and exhausted as I felt. John, we need to talk, Richard said, his voice heavy with concern. I stepped aside, letting them in. Of course. Come in. We settled in the living room, the air thick with unspoken tension. Claire joined us, her eyes wide with curiosity and apprehension. We heard about what happened, Carol began, her voice trembling. And we were so sorry. We had no idea, Luke and Claire. It is a mess, I interrupted, not wanting to relive the details. But we are trying to figure it out. Richard nodded, his expression grim. We want to help. Luke is our son, but what he did was unforgivable. We want to support Hannah and make sure she's okay. Claire looked at them, her eyes filled with remorse. I am so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Carol's gaze softened slightly. We know, Claire, but actions have consequences. We need to focus on Hannah now. I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. Hannah needs all the support she can get. She's been through so much. Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. John, we have always respected you and your family. We want to do whatever we can to help you through this. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by their offer. We appreciate it. The conversation turned to practical matters, how to support Hannah emotionally, what steps to take to ensure she felt safe and loved, and how to navigate the complex web of relationships that had been shattered by the affair. As the evening wore on, I felt a strange sense of camaraderie with Carol and Richard. They were just as hurt and confused as we were, trying to make sense of the betrayal and find a way forward. After they left, Claire and I sat in the living room, the silence between us more comfortable than it had been in weeks. They were good people, Claire said softly. I nodded. Yeah, they are. It's good to know we are not alone in this. Claire looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Do you think we can ever really move past this, John? I sighed, leaning back on the couch. I don't know, but we are trying, and that is all we can do right now. The next morning I received a call from my sister, Emily. She had heard about what happened and wanted to check in. Hey, John, how are you holding up? She asked, her voice filled with concern. It's been rough, I admitted. But we are managing. Do you need anything? Support? A break? Someone to talk to? She offered. I appreciated her concern. Thanks, Emily. Just knowing you are there means a lot. I might take you up on that offer to talk. Anytime, she said. Family sticks together. After we hung up, I felt a bit lighter, knowing I had more support. I decided to take a walk to clear my head. As I strolled through the park, I saw Hannah sitting on a bench, staring at the lake. I approached her, sitting down beside her. "Hey, sweetie." She looked up, managing a small smile. "Hey, Dad." We sat in silence for a while, watching the ducks swim by. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "Luke wants to go to counseling," she said, her voice hesitant. "He says he is willing to do whatever it takes to fix things." I nodded, understanding her turmoil. "That's a big step, Hannah. It means he is serious about making amends." She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know if I can ever trust him again, but I still love him. It's also confusing." "Love is complicated," I said gently, "and trust takes time to rebuild. You don't have to decide anything right now. Just take it one day at a time." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I felt a surge of protectiveness. "Thanks, Dad, for being here. Always, Hannah. Always." As we sat there, I felt a renewed sense of determination. We were all in this together, trying to navigate the wreckage and find a path to healing. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be more challenges ahead, but with the support of family and friends, I believed we could make it through. The counseling sessions with Claire were starting to yield some results. We had begun to communicate more openly, sharing our feelings and fears. Despite the pain, I could see glimpses of the woman I had once loved. But the road to recovery was long, and trust was still a fragile thing. One evening, as Claire and I were sitting on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset, she turned to me with a tentative smile. "John, I know it's hard to believe, but I am committed to making this work. I want to rebuild what we lost." I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. "I want that too, Claire, but it's going to take time." She nodded, tears welling up. "I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes." The next morning, I decided it was time to check in on Hannah and see how she was doing. I drove over to her friend S' house, where she had been staying. When I arrived, I found Hannah in the backyard, tending to a small garden. "Hey, sweetie," I called out, walking over to her. She looked up, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Hey, Dad, what brings you here?" "I wanted to see how you were doing," I said, sitting down on a nearby bench, "and to talk about Luke." Hannah sighed, sitting beside me. "He's been reaching out a lot. He wants to go to counseling together." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked, gently. She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. "I'm scared. I don't know if I can face him, but I also feel like I need to understand why he did what he did." I nodded, understanding her conflict. "It's okay to be scared, Hannah, but facing those fears might help you find some closure, whether you decide to stay with him or not." She took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Okay, I'll give it a try." I felt a mixture of pride and sorrow for my daughter. She was handling this betrayal with a grace and strength that I admired. A few days later, Luke and Hannah started their counseling sessions. It was awkward at first, with long silences and tearful admissions, but gradually they began to talk, really talk, about their feelings, their regrets, and their hopes for the future. Meanwhile, Claire and I were making progress too. We had agreed to focus on rebuilding our friendship first, taking things one day at a time. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain and anger resurfaced, but we were committed to trying. One evening, after a particularly intense counseling session, Claire and I decided to go for a walk. As we strolled through the park, she reached for my hand, and for the first time in months, I didn't pull away. "Thank you for giving us a chance," she said softly. I squeezed her hand gently. "We owe it to ourselves to try." Just as things seemed to be settling down, life threw us another curveball. One morning, I received an unexpected call from Emily, my sister. "John, I think you should come over," she said, her voice urgent. "What is wrong?" I asked, alarmed. "It says about Mom. She's not doing well," Emily replied, her voice cracking. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Our mother had been battling a chronic illness for years, and I knew this day would come, but I wasn't ready for it. "I'll be there as soon as I can," I said, my voice shaking. I told Claire about the call, and she insisted on coming with me. "You shouldn't face this alone," she said, her eyes filled with concern. We drove to Emily S' house in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. When we arrived, I found Mom looking frail and tired, but she managed a weak smile when she saw us. "Hey, Mom," I said, sitting beside her bed. "How are you feeling?" She reached out, taking my hand. "I've had better days, son, but it's good to see you." Emily and Claire stood nearby, offering their support. We spent the day talking, reminiscing about happier times, and trying to make Mom as comfortable as possible. It was a stark reminder of how precious and fragile life was. That night, as Claire and I drove home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the people in my life. Despite the pain and betrayal, there was still love and support, and that made all the difference. The next morning, I received a call from Luke. "John, can we meet? I need to talk to you." Reluctantly, I agreed, curious about what he had to say. We met at a local cafe, and Luke looked more haggard than ever. "Thanks for meeting me," he said, his voice strained. "What do you want, Luke?" I asked, not bothering to hide my irritation. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. Counseling with Hannah has been eye-opening. I realize now how much I have hurt her and you." I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I want to make amends," he said earnestly. "I know it's not easy, but I am willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust and Hannah S." I looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. It was a long road ahead, but maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. "We'll see, Luke," I said finally. "It is up to Hannah. If she's willing to give you another chance, then I'll support her." He nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. "Thank you, John. That means a lot." As we parted ways, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the start of a new chapter, one where we could all find healing and forgiveness. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to regain some semblance of normalcy. Hannah continued her counseling sessions with Luke, and their relationship, though still fragile, was starting to show signs of healing. Claire and I were also making progress, our friendship strengthening as we navigated the rocky terrain of rebuilding trust. One Saturday afternoon, Claire suggested we have a family barbecue, hoping to bring everyone together in a more relaxed setting. Reluctantly, I agreed, thinking it might be a good way to mend some of the broken bonds. The backyard was filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of laughter as Hannah, Luke, and even Emily joined us. For a few hours, it almost felt like old times. Almost. As the evening wore on, I found myself sitting by the fire pit, lost in thought. Claire sat beside me, handing me a beer. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, her voice gentle. I sighed, taking a sip of the beer, just thinking about how much has changed, how much we've all been through. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the flickering flames. "It's been a tough journey, but I'm grateful we are still here trying to make things work." Just as I was about to respond, Emily approached, a worried look on her face. "John, can we talk for a minute?" "Sure," I said, standing up and following her to a quieter corner of the yard. "I've been doing some digging," she began, her voice low. "I know this might be hard to hear, but there's something you need to know." My heart pounded as I listened, dreading what she might say next. "Claire wasn't just having an affair with Luke," she said, her voice trembling. "There were others." I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "What are you talking about?" "I found messages on her old phone," Emily continued. "Messages to other men. This wasn't an isolated incident, John. She's been unfaithful before." Anger and betrayal surged through me, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "I only just found out," she said, her eyes pleading. "I'm so sorry, John. I thought you deserved to know the truth." I took a deep breath, trying to process the new information. It felt like a knife to the heart, reopening old wounds just as they were beginning to heal. "Thanks for telling me, Emily," I said finally, my voice cold. "I need some time to think." As she walked away, I felt a surge of anger and pain. Claire had betrayed me, not just once, but multiple times. The fragile trust we had been trying to rebuild was shattered once again. I confronted Claire later that night, unable to hold back my anger any longer. "Why didn't you tell me about the others?" She looked at me, her face pale and stricken. "John, I didn't know how to tell you. I was ashamed, and I thought it was in the past." In the past? I shouted, my anger boiling over. How am I supposed to trust you when you've been lying to me all along? Tears streamed down her face as she reached out to me. I'm so sorry, John. I never meant to hurt you. I was lost and confused, but I'm committed to making things right. I pulled away, unable to look at her. I don't know if I can do this, Claire. Trust is everything, and you've broken it over and over again. She sobbed, collapsing onto the couch. Please, John, give me one more chance. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. I stood there, torn between my love for the woman I had married and the deep wounds her betrayals had inflicted. I need time to think, I said finally, turning away from her. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I avoided Claire, spending more time at work and trying to find some clarity. I confided in Emily, who offered her support and reassured me that I wasn't alone. One evening, as I was sitting in my office, lost in thought, Hannah walked in. Dad, can we talk? Of course, sweetie, I said, motioning for her to sit down. She looked at me, her eyes filled with concern. I know you're hurting, Dad, and I know Mama's betrayals run deep, but I also know that she loves you, and she is willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I sighed, rubbing my temples. It's not that simple, Hannah. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it is hard to rebuild. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. I understand. But you and Mom have been through so much together. Maybe it's worth giving her one more chance. Her words resonated with me, and I realized that despite everything, I still loved Claire. We had built a life together, and maybe, just maybe, it was worth fighting for. The next day I approached Claire, who looked as though she hadn't slept in days. We need to talk, I said, my voice firm but calm. She nodded, her eyes filled with hope and fear. Okay, we've been through a lot, I began, taking a deep breath. And I've been deeply hurt by your actions. But I also believe in second chances. If we're going to make this work, we need to be completely honest with each other. Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. I promise, John, no more lies, no more secrets. I want to rebuild our trust and our life together. It was a tentative start, but it was a start nonetheless. We agreed to continue our counseling sessions, focusing on rebuilding trust and healing the wounds of the past. As the weeks went by, we began to see small but significant changes. Our communication improved, and we started to reconnect on a deeper level. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt and pain, but we were committed to trying. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Claire took my hand. Thank you for giving us another chance, John. I squeezed her hand gently, feeling a glimmer of hope. We have a long way to go, but I believe we can get there. In the end, it wasn't just about forgiveness. It was about choosing to move forward, to rebuild what had been broken, and to find a way to trust and love again. As Claire and I continued our journey towards healing, we encountered new challenges that tested our resolve. Trust was fragile, but we were committed to rebuilding it, one day at a time. Hannah and Luke's relationship was also slowly mending, though it was clear they still had a long way to go. One weekend, Claire suggested we take a family trip to the cabin by the lake, a place filled with happy memories. Reluctantly, I agreed, thinking it might be a good way to strengthen our bonds. The drive up to the cabin was quiet but not uncomfortable. The air was crisp and cool, and as we approached the lake, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. The cabin was a symbol of better times, a reminder of the love and happiness we once shared. We spent the first day hiking through the woods, the fresh air and beautiful scenery helping to ease the tension. In the evening, we sat around a campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to take a walk by the lake. As I strolled along the shore, lost in thought, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Luke, looking tentative. Mind if I join you? He asked. I shrugged, gesturing for him to walk beside me. Sure. We walked in silence for a while, the only sound the gentle lapping of the water against the shore. John, I know I have said this before, but I'm truly sorry for everything, Luke said, his voice filled with remorse. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want to make things right. I took a deep breath. choosing my words carefully. Luke, what you and Claire did was a betrayal of the highest order. It's going to take time to heal from that. But I see that you are trying, and that is a start. He nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you. I wanted to let you down. We continued our walk, talking about lighter topics, and I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could all move forward. Back at the cabin, Claire and Hannah were preparing breakfast. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air, and the atmosphere was surprisingly relaxed. We sat down to eat, sharing laughter and enjoying the moment. Later that day, Hannah pulled me aside. Dad, I need to tell you something. What's up, sweetie? I asked, concerned. She took a deep breath, her eyes serious. I think I might be pregnant. The words hit me like a freight train. Are you sure? I took a test and it was positive, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. I haven't told Luke yet. I don't know how he'll react. I hugged her tightly, my mind racing. It's going to be okay, Hannah. We'll figure this out together. That evening, after the initial shock had worn off, Hannah told Luke. He was stunned, but quickly reassured her that he would be there for her and the baby, no matter what. It was a poignant moment, filled with a mixture of fear and hope. As the days went by, we adjusted to the idea of a new addition to the family. It wasn't what any of us had planned, but it was a chance for a fresh start, a new beginning. The news brought us closer together, reminding us of the importance of family and the strength of our bonds. One night, as Claire and I sat on the porch, she took my hand. John, I know things are still fragile between us, but I want you to know that I love you. I am committed to making this work. I looked at her, seeing the sincerity in her eyes. I love you too, Claire, and I am willing to keep trying. We leaned into each other, the warmth of our connection a comforting balm to our wounded hearts. The road ahead was still uncertain, but we were determined to face it together. As the weeks turned into months, we continued our counseling sessions and worked on rebuilding trust. There were setbacks and moments of doubt, but there were also moments of joy and renewed hope. Hannah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and the anticipation of the baby's arrival brought a sense of excitement and purpose. One evening, as we gathered in the living room to discuss baby names, I realized how far we had come. We were no longer just a family fractured by betrayal. We were a family healing, growing, and finding our way back to each other. The journey was far from over, but we were stronger for having faced our challenges together. And as we looked forward to the future, we knew that love, forgiveness, and determination would guide us through whatever lay ahead. The weeks that followed were filled with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Hannah's pregnancy became the focal point of our lives, bringing a sense of purpose and unity that we desperately needed. Despite the underlying tension from past betrayals, the excitement of a new family member helped to mend some of the emotional wounds. Claire and I continued our counseling sessions, and while trust was still a delicate issue, we were learning to communicate better and rebuild our relationship. Hannah and Luke also made significant strides in their counseling, growing closer as they prepared for the arrival of their baby. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to have a small gathering at the house to celebrate Hannah's pregnancy. Close friends and family came over, and for the first time in a long while, there was laughter and joy in the air. It felt like a turning point, a moment of healing and renewed hope. As the evening drew to a close and guests started to leave, Claire pulled me aside. John, I know things have been difficult, but I want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to work through this with me. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my heart. We are in this together, Claire, one step at a time. She hugged me tightly, and for a moment, all the pain and betrayal seemed to fade away. Later that night, as we were cleaning up, Hannah approached me, her face serious. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. What's on your mind, sweetie? I asked, sensing her apprehension. She took a deep breath, looking down at her hands. I've been thinking a lot about the future, and I want you to know that I plan to stay with Luke. I know it's not what you want to hear, but I love him, and I believe we can make it work. I felt a pang of concern but nodded, understanding her resolve. Hannah, I want you to be happy. If you believe in your heart that staying with Luke is the right choice, then I support you." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Dad. That means a lot to me." As Hannah and Luke prepared for the arrival of their baby, Claire and I found ourselves drawn into their excitement. We helped set up the nursery, attended prenatal appointments, and planned for the future. The experience brought us closer, reminding us of the love that had initially brought us together. One evening, as we sat on the porch, enjoying the cool breeze, Claire took my hand. "John, I think we're going to be okay." I looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. "I think so too, Claire. We have come a long way." The months flew by, and before we knew it, Hannah went into labor. The entire family rushed to the hospital, anxious and excited. After several hours of tense waiting, we finally heard the cries of a newborn baby. Luke emerged from the delivery room, tears streaming down his face. "It's a girl. Hannah and the baby are both doing great." The relief and joy were palpable as we took turns holding the tiny bundle of joy. In that moment, all the pain and betrayal seemed to melt away, replaced by the pure love and hope that a new life brings. As we gathered around Hannah's hospital bed, Claire and I shared a look of understanding. The road had been long and filled with heartache, but we had made it through, stronger and more united than before. In the days that followed, our home was filled with the sounds of a newborn baby, bringing a sense of renewal and happiness. We celebrated each milestone, cherishing the precious moments and the second chance at happiness that life had given us. One night, as I was rocking the baby to sleep, Claire came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "John, thank you for not giving up on us." I turned to her, my heart full. "Thank you for fighting for us, Claire. We've been through a lot, but we've come out stronger." We stood there, holding each other and the new life that symbolized our journey. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them together. As the months passed, our family continued to heal and grow. Trust was slowly rebuilt, and the bonds between us became stronger than ever. We learned to cherish the present, forgive the past, and look forward to the future with hope and resilience. In the end, it wasn't just about overcoming betrayal. It was about the power of love, forgiveness, and the determination to rebuild and create a new beginning. And as we moved forward, we knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together as a family. Time has a way of healing even the deepest wounds. As the months turned into a year, our family grew closer, our bonds stronger than ever before. Hannah and Luke settled into their roles as new parents, and their relationship blossomed with the arrival of their daughter, Lily. Claire and I continued to work on our marriage, finding new ways to connect and support each other. One crisp autumn afternoon, we decided to have a picnic at the park, a tradition we had let fall by the wayside in recent years. It was a perfect day, the leaves turning vibrant shades of red and gold, the air filled with the scent of fallen leaves, and the laughter of children playing nearby. As we spread out the picnic blanket and unpacked the food, I looked around at my family and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Claire was helping Hannah with Lily, who was giggling and reaching for the colorful leaves. Luke was setting up the grill, his face relaxed and content. "John, do you remember our first picnic here?" Claire asked, her eyes twinkling with nostalgia. I smiled, the memory flooding back. "Of course! You made those awful sandwiches with way too much mustard." She laughed, the sound filling the air like music. "And you ate them anyway, trying to be polite." "Well, I was trying to impress you," I admitted, chuckling. "And it worked, didn't it?" She reached out, taking my hand. "It did. And I'm still impressed by you, John." We shared a tender moment, the past and present blending seamlessly. It felt like we had come full circle, returning to the place where our love story began, stronger and wiser from the journey we had taken together. As the afternoon wore on, we played games, ate delicious food, and enjoyed each other's company. At one point, Luke stood up, holding a glass of sparkling cider. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, his voice filled with emotion. We all raised our glasses, listening intently. "To family," Luke began. We've been through a lot, but we have come out the other side stronger and closer. I want to thank each of you for your support, your love, and your forgiveness. Here's to new beginnings and the beautiful future ahead of us. We clinked glasses, the sound ringing out like a promise. As we drank, I looked at Hannah, who was smiling at Luke with such love and admiration. Claire squeezed my hand, her eyes reflecting the same sentiment. Later, as the sun began to set and the sky turned shades of pink and orange, I took a moment to reflect on how far we had come. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught us the importance of love, forgiveness, and resilience. We had faced our demons, healed our wounds, and emerged stronger than ever. That night, as we packed up and headed home, I felt a sense of peace and contentment. We had faced the storm and found our way back to each other. The future was bright, filled with the promise of new memories and the enduring strength of our family bonds. As we tucked Lily into her crib and said our goodnights, Claire and I stood in the doorway, watching our granddaughter sleep. "She's beautiful, isn't she?" Claire whispered, her voice filled with awe. "She is," I agreed, wrapping my arm around her, "and she's a symbol of everything we have fought for and everything we have gained." We stood there side by side, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Our journey had brought us full circle, reminding us of the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. In the end, it wasn't just about overcoming betrayal. It was about finding hope in the darkest of times, about the strength that comes from forgiveness, and about the unbreakable bonds of family. We had been tested, but we had prevailed. And now, we were ready to embrace the future with open hearts and unwavering love.